Welcome to this training session brought to you by the Society of American Archivists, Archivists of Religious Collections section. My name is Tom McCullough, and this is our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional lands of many Indigenous nations. We know that Indigenous peoples have suffered from historical and ongoing injustices and understand as an archival organization that we must work towards sharing historical truths and renew respectful relationships with Indigenous communities. We respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land as the original caretakers. We are grateful for their stewardship and protection of the water and earth. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Today's topic is Introduction to ArchivesSpace. Before I introduce our presenter, let's review the disclaimer here. The content in these presentations is for information only and is not legal advice. Our views do not represent the organizations where we work. We do not make any endorsements or guarantees. We are not liable for any loss or damage caused by your use of the content we provide. It is your responsibility to critically evaluate the content provided in the presentation or any accompanying materials. Also, please remember the points shown on this next slide. Please mute your microphone and turn off your video. You can click on the closed captioning button to get closed captioning under the More button. There will be a question period after the presentation concludes. Please use the Q&A feature under the More button to ask your questions during the question period. We will not be monitoring the chat. Please be respectful in your interactions. We expect you to follow the SAA Code of Conduct. This session will be recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel within 2 weeks. We encourage you to join the Society of American Archivists if you are not a member. And now, I would like to introduce our speaker, my friend and colleague, Meaghan O'Riordan. Take it away, Meaghan.
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks again to Tom and to the ARCS Steering Committee for inviting me to give this talk. As was shared, I'm Meaghan O'Riordan, and I'm the director of the archives for the Moravian Church in America Southern Province, which is based in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I'll give a little bit of an introduction about myself, especially in relationship to ArchivesSpace. And then we'll go into what exactly is ArchivesSpace and some aspects to getting started. The bulk of the information will be about the different types of records that you'll find in ArchivesSpace. And finally, there will be time for questions at the end. I also have my instance pulled up if at the end there is time and there are certain things that people would like to see live rather than a screenshot, or if I need to use that instance to answer a question. So I already told you a little bit about who I am. And as Tom mentioned, I was previously the accessioning archivist for the Stuart A. Rose Manuscript Archives and Rare Book Library at Emory University. When I got there in 2016, they were not using a centralized collection management system, but instead had put together a homegrown system that included an access database, various spreadsheets, and hand-coded EAD. By 2018, they were ready to implement ArchivesSpace using a phased approach, and the first phase was for accessioning, so I ended up being heavily involved in the process. I helped determine field usage guidelines, developed workflow documentation, and helped to lead training sessions for other library staff, especially within the Rose Library. So when I came to the Moravian Archives in 2022, I implemented ArchivesSpace as our collection management system right away. I want to note that I am by no means an expert on this topic, but I am happy to share what I have learned from using the system for about 7 years, especially in the context of a small religious archive. So what is ArchivesSpace? I like to think of it in 2 parts, one being the back end for collection management and one being the front end for users. Many institutions that have implemented ArchivesSpace have had the resources to develop their own significantly modified public user interface, but my institution doesn't have those kinds of resources, so we are using it pretty much straight out of the box with some modification for look and feel. In other words, our branding is there, but mostly it looks like it would look for anyone else just using the product straight out of the box. The most important thing to point out about ArchivesSpace is that it is a relational database, meaning that all the information lives in different kinds of records that then relate or connect to one another. This can be a different way of thinking about your collection information if you've been using other tools, but it is a really useful setup because you only have to enter information one time in one place, and then you can link back to it over and over again without having to repeatedly enter the same data. And I'll explain more what I mean when we get to the different types of records. So one question you might have is about the hosting services and costs of having an ArchivesSpace instance. Lyrasis and Atlas Systems are the only registered service providers, though it is open source, so you could always try to host your instance yourself if you or someone at your organization has the necessary skills to do so. My institution has hosting with Lyrasis, and their hosting is tiered based on institution size, including a solo archivist tier. Given the small size of our organization, we are at the lowest tier, just above solo archivists. We pay $460 for an annual Lyrasis membership, which gives us a discount on our hosting and with Hollinger, by the way, among many other benefits. And so with our discount for our membership, our hosting fee is $8,820 annually. And when I say that we're a small organization, I have 2 full-time people reporting to me and 1 part-time person reporting to me, and that's my whole organization. So there's 4 of us. In general, I have found Lyrasis to be wonderful to work with. It's very easy to submit a ticket with them. They respond quickly and helpfully. I'm not sure what all I get from Lyrasis with their hosting service. Like, I'm sure I'm not taking full advantage of what I'm paying for, but they did customize the front page of my user interface for me at no additional charge. So that seems like a pretty good deal. And in general, I know I'm paying to utilize the skills of staff that I don't have at my organization, and peace of mind that if something goes wrong with the system, then they will be on top of it to help me out. So when getting started, you first want to think about your users and user groups, different repositories, and settings. During the initial setup with Lyrasis, you can define the different types of user groups that you want to have, which limits access in different ways. For example, if you have curators who don't need to be able to edit your system of record for collection information, but need to be able to see that information, you can make their user group one that is view only. Likewise, if you have student workers, interns, or volunteers, you can create a user group that has limited ability to edit information to reduce the likelihood that they will permanently change or delete something important. After you create a user, the person must first log in, and then you can assign them to a repository or more than one repository. And until that initial login and repository assignment, they won't see anything in the back end of ArchivesSpace. So that's one of the things that we always forget. We create a user, give them their login information, and then they say, I can't see anything. You have to assign them a repository. Now, I did just say more than one repository. Yes, you can have more than one, though I'm not exactly sure what the limit is. I asked about adding a second one to my instance and was told I could do so at no cost. When I was at Emory, we had 2 repositories for the Rose Library, one for the manuscript collections and one for university archives. But there were even more repositories in the instance for the whole university. So the theology library had a repository, as did the law library, the health sciences library, and so on. At the Moravian Archives, I share my building with the Moravian Music Foundation, which maintains its own archive of music. So we are contemplating starting a repository in my ArchivesSpace instance for them. This is a good way to keep holdings that are related, but not owned by the same entity connected. Repositories share agent records and subject records, but otherwise the records are separate. The one caveat of multiple repositories is if you have access to more than one, you want to make sure that you are sitting in the correct repository before you start editing or correcting records or creating records. Finally, once you have your instance and repository set up, you can set preferences for all repositories, a single repository, or what will be the default for repositories. These preferences are about how information displays and is sorted. For instance, if you want accession records to automatically sort by accession number when you're browsing, this is where you would set up your instance to do that. This is just showing some screenshots of some of these features. At the top, you can see my login box, and also note my logo in the upper left-hand corner, which is part of the branding available to you, even on the product out of the box. You can also see that dark purple color on the buttons. That's also part of the branding that you can do even with the product out of the box. Below that on the left is showing how to change repositories to make sure you're sitting in the correct one. And to the right is showing the different preferences that you can set up. And at the bottom is showing the different user groups that we have set up for our repository. So we have an advanced data entry, archivists, basic data entry, managers, project managers, and viewers. And those different user groups have different levels of permission for editing and viewing content in the repository. So we're going to move on to talking about the different types of records in ArchivesSpace. And the first type of record we'll talk about is accession records. ArchivesSpace only requires that you enter an identifier for an accession record. Remember earlier I talked about at Emory helping to write field usage guidelines. I recommend that you do so, especially for something like the accession record, since almost nothing is actually required by the system. You'll want to set a standard for your repository about which fields are required and what information should be included in them. One excellent way to do that is to refer to the archival accessioning best practices that were published at the end of last year. I've provided a shortened URL at the bottom of this screen, tinyurl.com/accessionbp. There's a section of the best practices titled Accession Record Elements that provides recommendations on what to include in an accession record, and you can use that resource to determine how to use the fields available in ArchivesSpace to capture the most important information about new acquisitions. And this is just showing you a larger view of what the accession record looks like. You can see on the left that there's a lot more potential than what you can see in the image. But there are lots of subrecords of different types of information that you can include in your accession record. So it's important to review the fields that are available to you, review best practices, and then come up with how your institution wants to use those fields in that record to best suit your needs. Next, we'll talk about resource records, and these are your collection records, or perhaps better described as your finding aims. This is the record that will display in the public user interface for end users to search and explore. So the resource record has more requirements from ArchivesSpace, including a title, identifier, level of description, language, dates, extents, and language and scriptive description. I noted on the previous slide that there are defaults that you can set for some of these fields in the settings, the preferences that we talked about earlier. In particular, it is useful to set the language and script of description for most people that will be English and Latin, instead of having to search for those for every record you complete. But if you also know that most of your collections are papers versus records, or most are in English, it's nice to set those defaults as well to save you just a little bit of time when creating a resource record. Some things will already be in place. I have mine set on item and records because most of our existing description is at the item level, and most of what we deal with are church records. So that's how mine is set up. Another thing that will help you save time when creating a resource record is if you spawn it from an accession record. If you've accessioned a new collection, you have probably already completed a lot of the information that is required in the resource record. You can generate a new resource record from an accession record rather than repeating that data entry. The fields that the two records share will carry over from the accession record to the resource record. Again, just like with the accession record, I would advise coming up with field usage guidelines. Even though ArchivesSpace requires more fields for the resource record, those required fields still aren't enough to make the resource record, which is also your finding aid, remember, to be compliant with describing archives, the content standard, also known as DACS. You'll want to set up your own guidelines for how to utilize the resource record and also make sure your use is in line with professional standards. One thing about the resource record is that you don't necessarily have to enter the container list one by one. You can, that is an option, especially if you have a collection that's just an item or two. But most of us will have several lines in our container list, and there are several import spreadsheet templates that you can use that come with ArchivesSpace, including one to import archival objects. So you can keep your container list in a spreadsheet and then import it into the resource record. At the top is a screenshot from the original import template, which even if it wasn't on this screen as a screenshot, it's cumbersome and really detailed. But below is a screenshot of an import that I did for a collection, and you can see that I only use a handful of the fields available that in the bulk import template to make it less difficult to use. So I have a modified template that I provide to my staff and that I use myself when creating a container list to import into ArchivesSpace. Finally, if you like having the EAD file, or if you want to continue using a homegrown user interface that relies on the EAD file, you can export that file from the resource record along with some others that you can see here, like Mark XML and a PDF. I don't know if they're still doing this, but at one point at Emory, we had talked about exporting the PDF and printing it to add to the collection file. So that's also an option that you can do here. Next up is agent records. An agent is any entity that acts on a collection and can be a person, family, corporate entity, or software. These also serve as your name records for subject headings. This is how you link to the source or creator of a collection as well. One nice feature is that you can add contact details, which is especially helpful for donors who hold copyright, and that information is not visible to users. Here's just a few screenshots of the agent records, but also of the Library of Congress Name Authority File import tool here at the bottom. You can use that tool and import records for those that have them directly from the source. This will gather all of the data about them, and you can still add contact details or other information to the record as needed. So it just creates an agent record based on the Library of Congress Name Authority File record, and then you can still edit that record for your repository. It does not stay updated. So for example, if somebody passes away and their year of death is added to their name authority file record, your record in your ArchivesSpace instance will not update. You would have to update it yourself. But it's still nice to have those come directly over from Library of Congress. The next type of record we'll talk about is the event record. This is probably where people get the most overwhelmed. Event records can be linked to an agent record, accession record, or resource record. And the purpose of using event records is to capture information about your holdings that isn't otherwise being captured by a record in ArchivesSpace. There are 37 choices for event records. So it is important, again, to set guidelines and determine what will be most useful for your repository to use. As an example, at Emory, we decided to use 3 events for accession records. The agreement signed event to capture the date of the deed plus who signed it. The custody transfer event to capture the date of transfer plus the curator who selected it. And the accession event to capture the actual date of full accessioning plus who accessioned it. Note that the accession record does have a date field that populates automatically when you create it, but the date that we created an accession record often had no relationship to the date that we finished fully accessioning it, or even the date it was physically transferred. So we wanted to use these events to capture that information. You can see here that there are actually 3 events available for the agreement: sent, signed, and received. You can really go wild with these event records, and that's why they can be overwhelming. We decided that for our purposes, we just needed to know the date the agreement was signed and who signed it, but that the other information like sent and received was unnecessary tracking that we wouldn't be able to maintain long term. That's another thing to consider when determining guidelines for event records. Not just what information isn't being captured by the other records, but what will you have the bandwidth to maintain as part of your regular workflow. Finally, we'll talk about digital object records. The most important thing to note here is that ArchivesSpace is not a digital asset management system or DAMS. It is not the place that stores your collection material. It's the place that stores the information about your collection material. You can use the digital object record to connect your description and your finding aid to the digital file in your DAMS. In other words, this is used to create a link between the finding aid and the born digital or digitized collection material described in that finding aid. This is usually done through a link between an archival object record, otherwise known as an item in your container list, and a digital object record. So here you can see how the digital object will appear in the finding aid in this top screenshot. This is something that was digitized, so we have the physical copy available that is requestable in the finding aid. However, if they want to look at it online, they just click on that link and it takes them to the object hosted on our digital library platform, which is AM Cortex. The branding is consistent, so it almost looks like the same site in these 2 screenshots, but these are 2 totally different systems that are being connected by the digital object record in ArchivesSpace. The last aspect of ArchivesSpace to discuss is container management. ArchivesSpace is designed to not only allow you to manage your collection intellectually, but physically as well. There are records for top containers, container profiles, locations, and location profiles. If you enter information for the physical measurements of containers and locations, the profiles, then you can use ArchivesSpace to find empty space in your building for you, and you can use it to calculate extent for your collections. What I mean is that if you tell ArchivesSpace how big a shelf is in your holdings area, and you tell ArchivesSpace the sizes of the containers sitting on that shelf in your holdings area, then ArchivesSpace can tell you how much space remains on that shelf. If you tell ArchivesSpace the sizes of all the containers in a collection, then ArchivesSpace can calculate an exact extent of that collection for you. Locations can be created one by one, or in batch, and only the building field is required. As for top containers, you can create them one by one, like I mentioned earlier, but if you use the archival object import template that we discussed to create your container list in your resource record, then your containers will be automatically generated. So you won't have to create your containers one by one and link them to your archival objects if you're using the import spreadsheet. Okay, in case you are more of a visual learner, I put together this diagram to show how the different records are connected. The accession records, agent records, event records, and resource records can all connect to one another. Top containers can be linked to either a resource record or an accession record, but are most often linked to resource records. And then top containers are linked to archival objects, container profiles, and locations, while locations are linked to location profiles, and digital objects are linked to archival objects. I know that was a lot of information, but it's a big and somewhat complicated system, so I did the best I could to give a high-level introduction. I'll go to the last slide so you have my email address, but I think it's time for questions.
Well, thank you, Meaghan. Thank you for sharing your knowledge about ArchivesSpace with so many of us here today, and for introducing many of us to ArchivesSpace. It looks like we already have a number of questions that have been typed into the Q&A feature of Zoom, and I'll just start with the first one. Someone asked, I am considering library host for my institutional instance of ArchivesSpace. Is library host license?
So I looked this up when I was preparing for this presentation. There are many hosts or service providers, I should say, but the only two that are known as registered service providers are Lyrasis and Atlas Systems. There are also consortium providers and then affiliates. And I don't really know what the difference is between all of those, but ArchivesSpace has a ton of information on their website about the different types of service providers. So I would just encourage you to check there for more information about that. And I'll put that link in the Q&A. That's the link to the service provider page on ArchivesSpace website.
Awesome, awesome. And you did get feedback from one person in the chat that said that they use library host. So
Okay,
looks like maybe it is possible. Awesome. Thank you, Meaghan. We had another question. How do you set default settings, for example, for language and script of description? Where is that settings menu located?
Okay, let me find it and then I will answer that question. But I'll share my screen. I just want to make sure I can find it first. Oh, and it's a good thing I didn't do this live because it's prompting me to log in again. Okay. I remember it was tricky to find. So let's see here. If you will please, whoever asked that question, email me and I will more than happily answer that question. I'm just not going to be able to find the answer on the fly.
Thanks, Meaghan. One participant asked, they said, my question is about integration into other systems. Is ArchivesSpace pretty friendly to integration? And well, I'll ask their second part of the question after you.
I've not tried to integrate it with very many other systems other than using the digital object record, but it clicks out to our digital repository very easily. So I think anything that has a static web addresses for your resources should be able to integrate pretty seamlessly. I think that question is probably more relevant if you have developer access who like are doing a lot of different customizations and modifications of your ArchivesSpace instance. And then they might be trying to integrate it with lots of different systems. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a big Airtable proponent, for example. There's not currently like, I actually make my container lists in Airtable, export them to Excel, and then import them to ArchivesSpace. There's currently not an integration where I could just create it in Airtable and push it to ArchivesSpace. But that's like something I would love to do. And I don't know if you can do that if you are a person with those chops who can do all that sort of development work or not. But anyway, if you have anything that you're doing using static links with, it seems to work pretty well.
Cool. This goes along with what you were saying with like digital materials. But the person also asked, what digital asset management system tends to be the best with linking ArchivesSpace, or which do you have experience with?
I just have experience with, well, with ArchivesSpace, I only have experience with the one we're currently using, which is AM Cortex, which I can also link to. Oh, that's taking it. Okay. Well, just Google AM Cortex. It's QUARTEX. And like I said, that's working pretty well. Our previous digital repository was DSpace, which is also, or ours was hosted by Lyrasis. I didn't love it for our digital repository, but I'm sure it would have integrated just fine for digital objects. But AM Cortex is working great, and I have nothing but good things to say about that platform for another day.
Awesome. I did add the link to the chat if anyone's
Thank
interested
you.
in AM Cortex. Speaking of digital objects, someone asked, would you be able to explain the difference between an archival object and a digital object in ArchivesSpace?
Yes. So an archival object is describing a physical item in your collection, slash it's a line in your container list. So the example that I had on the screen was from our slavery collection and was a bill of sale for a man named Adam. And so the archival object is the physical, is a description, I should say, of the physical bill of sale that we have in our collection. We have digitized that. And so the digital object is the description for the digitized copy of that bill of sale. So in both cases, their description, just one is of a physical object and one is of a digital or digitized object.
Awesome. Thank you. Someone asked, you mentioned importing container lists from a spreadsheet in order to create resource records. Will it also import from a Word document?
No. So, and I was talking about your container list, not the full resource record, although I think that you can do that, but that's not how I have used the import template. I've just used it for importing the container list. All of the templates are spreadsheets. What I do actually is I still, so at Emory, we wrote our finding aids in Word and then hand coded our EAD. I still write my finding aid, the collection level notes. I still write all of that in a Word document that becomes part of the collection file. And then I just copy paste over to ArchivesSpace. The only thing that I sort of like auto generate or import is the container list. And that's because I don't want to create 1 gajillion containers by hand in ArchivesSpace.
Awesome, thank you. Someone else in the chat asked, or sorry, in the Q&A asked, could you speak more about the process you had to go through to initiate your instance of ArchivesSpace? Did you set up the structure and define guidelines? Did you have to migrate?
I did not have to migrate. The Southern Province had no finding aids prior to my start, so I did not have any information that needed to be migrated. We did at Emory though, and so there was a whole process of which I did help with, but we had digital archivists, so I was not in charge of. But we did do field mapping between the data in our access database and the fields for ArchivesSpace so that they would match up when those files were imported into ArchivesSpace. I don't remember, somebody else had asked me, I made my staff listen to me to test this presentation, and they asked me if there were any problems with that migration, and I actually don't remember there being a lot of problems with the accession record migration from Access to ArchivesSpace. I don't remember having to do a ton of cleanup. I think it was pretty seamless. And getting the instance set up without any migration was a piece of cake. I basically just gave them, my logo. I didn't even design the way our PUI looks right away. I just let it look how it was going to look straight out of the box. But I just gave them our logo, and we talked a little bit about user groups, but I think the user groups were pretty much out of the box too, and just got going. Anything that I wanted to change I think the Library of Congress import tool that I showed for agent records, I think you have to ask them to add that. I had to ask them to add that, and I just knew about it because we had used it at Emory. So, but other than that, I just had them install it out of the box, and that was pretty easy peasy.
Fantastic. We have a pretty technical question here. Is there a field in ArchivesSpace accessions that people are using to record physical locations of accessions? They note that they had to use a user-defined field, but couldn't get it to appear in a report.
Yeah, so um, you can create containers and then link them to locations. So I mentioned this when talking about container management, and especially at the end with the little visual guide that I made. I only talked about top containers linking to resource records, but you can link top containers to accession records. And then if you do that, you can link those containers to locations. I prefer not to do that because that information is going to change once the collection is processed. So I think using a user-defined field is a great solution for that. I think I haven't played too much with the reporting, but I know you can do custom reporting now. And I wonder if you could get it to show up in a report if you made a custom report. That would be something to look into. But yeah, I think actually a user-defined field is a good solution for wanting to track that location in ArchivesSpace without creating containers and linking locations, which I understand why you wouldn't want to do that.
Fantastic. Someone asked about would it be possible to see the slide again where you drew the diagram of the ways the different records could be connected to each other. And I thought that worked out well since you just mentioned the visual that you created. I know it'll be recorded. This is being recorded and you'll be able to watch it, but maybe someone wants to take a screenshot of this slide.
Yeah, there it is. I'm glad because this was the last thing that I added, and I had to really play with it to make it not more confusing rather than less confusing.
And I'll just leave it up here for a moment in case someone is taking a screenshot. All right. So I think this question might help folks because you've mentioned dams a couple times. You described what a dams is, but what function does ArchivesSpace provide in relation to a dams? How would you describe that ArchivesSpace layer?
Yes. Actually, if it's okay, I'll keep sharing my screen and I might just show live, which is, you know, a risk, but so I'm going into um my dams. So my dams is hosted by AM Cortex, and um the actual digitized item is in here. I'm gonna filter so I can get to it. So this is the actual digital item. I'm in the backend, right? And so this is all the metadata that we've added to it, and we can add more to it. And there's all this information about this item. And this is the actual object. It's a digital object, but this is the actual object. And it can be viewed on the public version of our site. Right here. But let's say you don't know that we have a digital repository. You didn't click through to that, but you're interested in these bills of sale. And so you do find our PUI, which just is the pretty branding that they did for me on that. And you search for bill of sale in the finding aids, then this one will show up and you can see already that it says that there's a digital image. And you can click on that and learn all about this item. But then you can also click here to actually go to that same spot that we were just at and actually look at the item. This button is only here because there's a digital object record. This button would not exist in the finding aid if there was not a digital object record. So that is the relationship between ArchivesSpace and a DAMS. ArchivesSpace allows you to describe a digital item and link out to that digital item.
Awesome. One thing that someone asked that connects with AM Cortex, they were just curious about the cost of it annually, if you'd be able to speak to that.
I sure can. I'm just going to stop sharing so I don't show my whole budget to y'all. Yeah, let me just bring that up. And I think we are at also the lowest here for AM Cortex, being a small and fiscally strapped organization. It is $5,350 annually. And again, I've been very happy with it. It's no more confusing than any other dams, I should say. Like, it is a little confusing, but it's on the same level as any other dams platform is.
Awesome. I know that you just had up this screen that you were sharing, but someone asked if you could demonstrate searching and browsing the various types of records in the ArchivesSpace public user interface.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. So this is our home page, and we do have a custom URL. It's collections.moravianarchives.org. So you can also go there and play around with it. You can see at the top that you can browse by collection, you can browse subjects, and you can browse names. I believe that I tried to change and or customize those when we did this revamp of the homepage, and I was not able to do so. So I think those out of the box are pretty set in stone. But you can enter your keyword search here. You can limit to collections or digital materials. I did that digital object specifically for you guys, and so that's the only one we got right now. So we're not going to search by digital materials. I haven't linked the rest of them yet. And then you can also delimit by title, creator, subject, notes, or identifier. So if you happen to know that it's MSS 63, which is the slavery collection, you could just search that, but you could also browse to find that. There's all kinds of ways. And then you can put in these years to year, which will search on the creation date, I believe. And then you can also add rows and change your operator here to and or not. This is actually really useful for church records because, as you know, a lot of words will pull up a lot of results because they will appear in all church records. So you could search, for example, church register and say, and home Moravian church, which is our biggest church in the Southern Province. And so that way you would only get church registers for home Moravian church. So that's one thing you could do there. But also I want to point out this text down here is custom. And I also made a help page on our website about using ArchivesSpace. That gives some search tips and tells them how to request material and gives a glossary of ArchivesSpace terms. That URL is just moravianarchives.org/help. So that's also there for our users. And then, I smartly opened that in a new tab. And then there's all these other tabs down here at the bottom to get to other places on our website, and most importantly, to make a research appointment. So I often search Spongenberg. So you can see what kind of item it's showing you here. I mean, not what kind of item. You can see that this is a collection. I'm trying to see if there is a different type of record. Yes. So this is an actual file in a collection. So everything before there, these first 9 results are all collection level records. But then this is actually an item in a collection. And it is in the August Gottlieb Spongenberg papers. And this is telling you about the item. So it's not just bringing up collection files, but it's bringing up items as well. So yeah, all of these are items that are in, hopefully not just the Spongenberg collection. No, this is in provincial property records. So there's something there about Spongenberg. Is there anything else for that question of demonstrating searching and the kinds of results you can get and see?
I think that was perfect. Thank you, Meaghan.
Sure.
So we have a ton of questions. So we're probably going to go a little bit past 4 today. So for people who can stay, I hope that is good with y'all. But we're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. You still have many, Meaghan. Someone asked, do you have a systematic quality control for name or site authorities?
So I'm pretty much the only one that's working in ArchivesSpace, so I am the quality control, I suppose. The rest of my staff has access to it and they know how I feel about controlled vocabulary. So I think that they would be willing to adhere to whatever I ask them to do. I think that's part of your agent record field usage guidelines is, I mean, there's subject records too, which I didn't talk about because that's a whole other can of worms. But basically, we adhere to Library of Congress name authority file, Library of Congress subject headings, the Getty, art and architecture, the thesaurus for genre terms. And that's how we enter them, or how me enters them into ArchivesSpace. This gets tricky with multiple repositories because if you recall, I said that you share agent records and subject records among repositories. So you all have to agree that you're going to use certain vocabularies. If you have multiple repositories that are managed by different groups of people, you have to agree that that's what you're going to do. So it's really, quote unquote, the honor system. The only quality control right now I have is that I just happen to be the only person really working in ArchivesSpace.
Thank you. This is a technical question regarding event records. If we keep it simple and set up, say, 3 event records to begin, but later need to add a new event for a particular situation, quote unquote, as needed, is it easy enough to add or quote unquote turn on that particular new event?
You cannot turn them off. So they will always be there. So if you, out of the 37, you pick 3 to use, and then you decide to use a 4th one, it will already be there. So yeah, you don't actually have to worry about that. It will always be there. You just have to search or scroll to get to it.
Great, great. Someone asked, does ArchivesSpace use the latest version of EAD, encoded archival description, and how do instances adjust when new standards are released?
My assumption is yes, but I cannot say for sure. I will say that when they update the system, which I'm assuming that they sometimes do for this very situation, that there's lots of communication about when the new release is going to come, how it will affect you. They always say to check your customizations and make sure that the newest release, the newest update, didn't affect any of those customizations. I'll be honest with you, I've never double checked that the LC import tool still works. I just assume that it'll be fine because it's a pretty basic and standard customization, and that's the only one I have. So a new release has never broken my PUI either. But there's lots of communication about it, and like I said, the support is really, really good. So if for some reason something did break when you had an update, it'd be easy to get them to fix it. But yeah, I mean, ArchivesSpace is known as being created for archivists by archivists. I think there's some nuance to that story, but at any rate, you would think that they would be abreast, they would keep abreast of the changes to EAD and keep that updated with the system.
Thank you. Another question, can you use third-party reporting software like Crystal Reports with ArchivesSpace?
I've never tried. I hated the reports at Emory. They were never giving me exactly what I wanted. And then they released custom reporting after I left Emory and no longer really have needed it. So I've never I've actually not used the custom reporting feature, but I have a feeling that between the canned reports and the custom feature, that probably integration with a third party is not gonna work super well. But that's, again, I think a customization you'd have to ask for anyway with your hosting company to see if they could help you figure that out. So.
Awesome. So a couple of DAMS related questions. Another one about AM Cortex. Are you using, hopefully not too much of a side question, but are you using AM Cortex for your archival digital file? Maybe the master file or just the access file?
This is a great question. Right now, we still have all our digitized content on our local drives, our local server, in addition to having some of it on Cortex. It's important to note that there were 80 gigs of digital files when I got here, most of which were not well described enough for me to do anything with them. And so there's what's on Cortex is stuff that we have digitized since I've been here for the most part. And yeah, so those files still live locally as well as living on Cortex, but I'm not opposed to Cortex being the system of record for those files and letting them live there permanently and maybe having a backup on a server somewhere.
Thank you. You may have answered this question. I just want to ask it again in case it does help someone. Do digital objects in your DAMs connect back to the ArchivesSpace archival object record?
No, we do sort of have a plan for that. The slavery collection is the first collection we've had both a finding aid and digital files for, and it just went up like in February. So this is a new situation for us where we have the ability, or we have the components there to connect back and forth. There is a related resource field, metadata field in Cortex, which is what we've been talking about using to connect back to collections. So no, but there is a way to do it, and there is we have an idea that we will connect back to the finding aid, and so that the connection goes both ways. We just haven't done it yet.
Awesome. This is also related to the digital objects. Someone wanted to clarify to get the button to show up in your public user interface that you have a digital object record that does it contain a URL that links to your DAMs? That digital object record is linked to an archival object record, which is linked to a resource record in ArchivesSpace. I hope I asked that.
Yeah. I'll just show it if I can. Let's
Thank
see.
you.
I think that might be the easiest thing to do. So this is, like I said, I made it just for y'all. So this is our digital object record. It has the same title as the archival object. This identifier is actually the file name of the digitized copy. And then it's an image and it's text. And then this is the file URI. That is, you can see the word Cortex is right there. So that's linking to the item on Cortex. And then, okay, so that's the digital object. Then if we go to the archival object, so this is the archival object record. Then you see here under instances, it's in box 1. This is its location. This is all the stuff that's part of the physical item. But you can see here where it says add digital object. And so I did that, and then I linked to that digital object record, and that's what made the button appear. So that's why I haven't done it for everything yet, because there's, I think, 80 files to do it for. There is a digital object import template, but I've never used it before. So I haven't tested that out yet. But anyway, eventually we would create all 80 digital objects and then link all 80 digital objects to the 80 physical objects that are here.
Cool. I almost got this in there while you're sharing your screen. If you could share your screen, possibly, if it's easy to find, could you share your simplified import XLS?
Oh,
So
yeah.
something right before it goes in.
Yeah. So this is the this is the template that ArchivesSpace gives you. So you can see there's lots of stuff here. It's very complicated. There's lots of explainer text. There's lots of resources for how to use this. That's fine. After trial and error, came up with this. So I'm just using, let me make it bigger for you guys. I'm just using EAD, title, the hierarchy level, the level, the container instance type, so they're all mixed materials, and then the top container type indicator, so this is box and box number, folder and folder number, and then the barcode. And that's all the fields that I use from the archival import template to get items into ArchivesSpace.
Awesome. We have one last question in the chat. It's more of a general question, but you might be able to help with this. Someone asked that I'm an art historian and need to upskill with TMS or ArtLogic. However, the 2-day workshops are $1,000 and don't own the programs. Do you have any recommendations for how someone can learn such software? I guess like this or like ArchivesSpace. I'd even volunteer at a museum in exchange for learning. I'm in New York City.
Yeah, I actually think that's a great idea, is to volunteer for an organization using the software that you're interested in using, and see if they have the capacity to teach you. Like I quipped earlier that I made my staff listen to me give a test run of this. That included our intern who's in library school. And so she got sort of this same kind of lesson about using ArchivesSpace just by virtue of being our intern and being in the building that day. But if any of our interns ever ask me to show them something like this, I'm happy to do so. So I think that's true of most people in our profession. So I would definitely approach someone using your system and just ask if they would be willing, or even over Zoom. I mentioned Airtable earlier. I've given lots of Airtable demos over Zoom. I first gave something like this to the Northern Province staff when they were thinking about switching to ArchivesSpace. So yes, I would definitely just approach someone using your software and see if they would teach you.
Awesome. I think that was everything. That was all the questions in the chat. Well, thank you so much, Meaghan, for sharing your knowledge and expertise. I would call you an expert in ArchivesSpace. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this for ARCS MRC. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And as you might see in the chat from Mary Grace Costa, our next session is on June 5th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on archival description. And there's a link to the events page where you'll eventually be able to register for the Zoom there. So thanks so much for attending today again. And thank you, Meaghan. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
And take care.